All right, Harry, will you state your full name and let me know what branch of the military you served in?
Harry Robben Ledeker, U.S. Navy. I go by Robben.
Robin.
Mm-hmm.
Fix that on my paper. Robin, what were you doing before the war?
I was in high school. I was graduated from high school in May, turned 18 in May, was drafted in May, was on active duty in July 1943. Took boot camp. I was in the Navy, took boot camp, Farragut, Idaho.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, it was on a Sunday, and Sunday afternoon. We just got through with our Sunday lunch, and then we heard it on the radio that we'd been attacked by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor.
Did that make you want to join?
Well, yeah, I said, well, you know, they can't do that to us. We've got to go whip them.
So tell me about your basic training.
Well, I was from Kansas, and of course grew up in the Depression, and we never. Well, I think we only went on 2 vacations when I was growing up, and I'd never been to the mountains, and I took boot camp in Farragut, Idaho, in the mountains, Lake Penarel, I think it was, and I couldn't. The forest smelled piney and wonderful, and the water was clear, and I'm used to Kansas muddy water, and the rivers were muddy, and I just couldn't believe that there was a place like that. So it was wonderful. I mean, and then I think there were 1 or 2 people in my company. It was from my hometown, and there was 130 of us in a company, and we strangers, but it didn't take a couple of days till we were friends with everybody, and we all got along pretty well.
So what was your role in your unit?
Well, my role was to learn as much about the Navy as I could, and that's what boot camp was, is to do things together and all work together and learn how to march. And I remember the long lines in the mess hall. Seemed like forever. They stretched on forever, but you got through the meals real fast. So, but we just did what everybody else did in boot camp. Shot a rifle and went on the water and rowed a boat and did a lot of marching and plane recognition for what a Japanese Zero would look like if you were aboard ship and were on watch and you saw a plane. You could tell whether it was friendly or an enemy.
What ship did you serve on?
I did not serve on a ship. I was a hospital corpsman. After boot camp, I went home for 2 weeks leave, and then I was never home after that until after the war was over. And I remember I went back to Idaho, to Farragut, Idaho. In the middle of August, it started snowing, and I said, this can't be right, you know. It doesn't snow in August in Kansas. And so we were there for a little bit, and they assigned me to go to hospital corps school. So then we boarded a train, and the further we got, then they had to start blacking out, not having any light shine out of the train, and then we realized we must be going along the coast because we were being sent to San Diego, California, to Balboa Park to go to hospital corps school. And I remember on weekends, people would come and look across the fence one way and they'd see animals, and they'd look the other way and they'd see humans going to hospital corps school. So that was, but I enjoyed San Diego then also. And then after I got through with the hospital corps school, then they assigned me to a hospital in Shoemaker, California. And I was assigned to the surgical ward. And I don't think I probably worked so hard in all my life as I did on that. It was, your short day was 8 hours, your long day was 12. And on a 12-hour day, you were subject to 4-hour special watch on a patient if they were bad. You got in there like a special nurse just to sit with them to make sure everything went all right. And I can remember that I was young. I was 18 when I went into the service. I was still 18. And I remember I'd go to bed at night and get up in the morning and my ankles and feet would be swollen because I'd been on my feet and walking so much, so long. So finally one day there was an opening came up in the mess hall, and I said, I'll volunteer for that. And I did, and they sent me down to the mess hall, and the guy says, oh, you'll regret that. You'll never work so hard in all your life. It was a mess hall, so I couldn't believe that. So, but anyway, I went in there, and they had me making coffee. And to this day, I'll swear, I've never drank coffee. And I never drank it. So who'd they have making coffee? They had me making coffee. And I thought a little bit of coffee makes it taste good. A whole lot would make it taste a lot better. So there was some old chiefs in the Navy. I said, my goodness, that's the best coffee I've ever had. And they really liked that coffee. But the rest of them just drank about a half a cup or less and threw it away. But the old Navy men, they loved my coffee. And I did that for a while. And then I was transferred to a place, I can't remember what the name of it was, but we were doing amphibious training there. We got there and nothing seemed to happen for 2 weeks. The mess hall was open, but there wasn't anybody around. We just did whatever we wanted to as long as we didn't leave the base. The base was small, and then we come to find out we should have been on Liberty. I could have gone home, but nobody told us, and you didn't do anything unless you were told to do it, then you did it. So, and then we had a unit for bravery on Saipan, and we were still in the United States. So the commanding officer rescinded that commendation, and then after that they broke us up and sent us overseas.
Where were you deployed to overseas at that time?
Well, we got on this troop transport. I think it was a General George M. Marshall, maybe. I'm not sure about that. And we sailed to the South Pacific. We sailed to Fiji Islands. And on the way over, they said, well, now, if we're torpedoed, swim north of here about 1,200 miles and you'll hit Hawaii. So, but we were never torpedoed, thank God. But as we were coming into Fiji, I thought it was the most beautiful places I'd ever seen. The mountains came right down to the ocean, and it was beautiful. And we got down on the dock, and there was men doing the hula dance in grass skirts, great big, strong, husky guys. And I thought, boy, this is going to be nice. We had all our gear, everything we owned, carried on our back in our hammock, and had our sea bag tied, and the hammock tied around it. And that hammock and sea bag weighed about as much as I did, because only weighed about 135 pounds, I think, when got out of high school. And anyway, we walked down the gangplank, walked straight up down the gangplank to another ship, got aboard it, and then we went to Guadalcanal. And then I was assigned to a medical supply facility on Guadalcanal. And we were right next to a stationary hospital. And I think it was a Hospital 108. I'm not certain about that either, but they did all our meals, took care of all our doctors' appointments, anything like that if we had. And then we supplied them with medical supplies, and any ship that came into the harbor and needed medical supplies, we filled their requisitions. And I got to tell you this story, and I may tear up saying it. I was driving down the street one day in this hospital, and there were two guys walking along the street. And I looked at them, and I know those guys. They're from home. And this one guy, especially, Bruce Hollenbeek, he lived about a half a block from me, and we were good friends in high school. And we rode bicycles all over town, played football in the schoolyard that was right across the street from us. And from me, he lived a half a block down the street. And he was about almost, my birthday is May the 14th. I think his was May the 19th. And I was born in 1925. He was born in 1926. And anyway, we were good friends, and I went to the Navy, and I didn't see him, but I saw him there. He was a Marine, and there was another guy, his name Myers, walking with him. And I said, "What are you guys doing here?" He said, "Well, we're on R&R. We're about ready to go back to our unit." I said, "Okay, is there any," and they're being Marines seemed like they never got anything, and they never got promoted, it seemed like, either. But I said, "What can I get you? Can I get you anything?" "Well, we'd like to have a sheet. We haven't slept under a sheet in 6 months." I said, "Well, I can do that. What else?" "Well, could you get us a Coca-Cola?" I said, "I sure can." I said, "I'll meet you after the movie tonight." The hospital always put on a movie, and we went to the movie. Usually at night, that was the entertainment. Either that or played poker, and my money came too hard. I didn't play poker. So anyway, we met at the movie, saw the movie, and I gave him my sheets, and I said, "Now I'm giving you this Coke, but I have no way to cool it. So you'll have to drink it hot unless you can figure out a way to cool it." And they said, "Well, give it to us. We'll do something." And then I said, and then they said, "Well, and by the way, Robben, we're leaving first thing in the morning. We're going back to our unit." And I said, "Oh, well, that's great." I said, "When we get through this war, let's all meet in Dine Fessler." That's a drugstore that had a soda fountain right next to the movie theater. And I said, "Let's meet there and have a cold Coke after the war." And Bruce looked at me, and he said, "Robben, I'm not going to make it." I said, "Bruce, don't talk like that." He says, "Yes, you are." He says, "No, Robben, I'm not going to make it." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, God bless you." Shook his hand, turned around and walked off. He turned around and walked the other way, went to his unit, was on Guadalcanal, killed 4 days before his 19th birthday. So that's part of war. War is terrible. They shouldn't have wars. We ought to be able to figure out something not to have wars. So that was, and in the meantime, I got a letter from my folks and my brother had been captured in Germany. He was in the army. I think he was captured in the Battle of the Bulge. So that's one reason why I'm here today, is I want to honor him and Bruce. And I had another good friend, Dr. Henshaw. My brother was a prisoner of war about 6 months. Dr. Henshaw was a pilot, I think, in the Air Force. And he was shot down, and I think he was a prisoner like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, something like that. He kept a diary, and he said they force marched him about the time the Russians were going to run over and take the German prison camps of the Americans, and they wanted to get him closer to the Western Front, so they force marched him, and he said, I carried this diary with me, Robben, until I was so weak I had to throw it away because I just didn't have the strength to carry it anymore. So that's another reason why I felt honored to come to this 75th commemoration of D-Day. So then after we were there for a year on Guadalcanal with this medical supply, and we were getting so far behind the front lines that they said, well, we'll close this up. We're going to close your unit. Says, we want you to work and get it all loaded aboard ship. And we did that. We worked for 3 days and 3 nights without any sleep. And then we were sleeping in tents. And some guy came along and says, wake up, the war's over. We said, get out of here, we're tired, we want to sleep. And we all had orders to go aboard ship for the invasion of Japan. And I still feel like I wouldn't be sitting here today if Harry Truman hadn't dropped those bombs on Japan and they surrendered. So then I didn't have enough points to come home, so they flew me down to New Caledonia for 6 months, and I worked at another Navy medical supply facility station for 6 months. And then I came back on board a Kaiser ship, and I didn't know if that ship was going to make it or not. I think we sailed for 2 weeks at 2.5 knots or something like that, maybe 5 knots. Another troop ship, and sailed under the Golden Gate. And I think I was the first one under the Golden Gate aboard that ship. We landed, and I kissed the ground when we landed. Thought how lucky I was to make it through all that. The only thing I came close to having actual, combat, I guess, was there when we first got there for about a week or 2 weeks on Guadalcanal. There was a plane came over, and there was a Jap plane, and he would drop a bomb out in the jungle and then fly off. And the next day, do the same thing. That went on for maybe a week or 2 weeks. Never heard about him anymore. And so I don't know to this day whether they shot him down, he ran out of gas, or his plane needed parts, or he ran out of fuel, or what happened to him. But I couldn't think of what they called that guy. And so I talked to my friend who had been my locker partner, and we had the same birthday on the same date, the same year. He forged his folks' name on papers saying that they gave him permission to volunteer for the Marines. And he was in on the invasion of Guadalcanal. He said, "Oh, that was Washing Machine Charlie." And so if anybody knows what happened to Washing Machine Charlie, I'd like to know. And then my friend, he stayed my Marine friend on the same birthday. We stay in touch a little bit now, and he was in the Marines. He made a career out of the Marines. In World War II, he was in the Korean conflict. He was in Vietnam. He got wounded in World War II. He got wounded in Korea, and he got wounded in Vietnam. And I think he and his colonel were the last ones over the bridge between North and South Korea before they blew it up. So, and thank you, Gerald. He was now he got promoted for some reason. He was the high as you could go in the Marines as an enlisted person in E9. Fact is, they made him an officer one time. His colonel says, "I want you to be an officer." And Gerald says, "I don't want to be an officer." He says, "Yeah, I want you to be an officer." So he became an officer. I think it was a warrant officer. And as soon as he left that under that colonel, well, he got another colonel and says, "I want to be an enlisted man." So I think Gerald told me they took him before Congress and said, "Why in the world don't you want to be an officer?" He said, "Well, one thing, I make more money as an enlisted man, as an E9, than I do as an officer." So, well, that's enough about Gerald. We're talking about World War II here, so. But I had to get him in. So anyway, then I got called back in the Korean conflict, but that's another story. I stayed in the Navy Reserve and retired when I was 60. And I went from the Navy, from a seaman recruit to a lieutenant commander in the Medical Service Corps. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my service and proud of my country.
So, do you have any additional questions or anything?
Can you ask about the medical service corps and
Oh, yeah.
day-to-day responsibilities and such?
Can you talk a little bit more about your medical corps responsibilities and the day-to-day?
Well, we were in the medical supply facility, and our main job was we'd get bulk medical supplies in, and then we'd store them in warehouses, and then we would, when the requisitions would come in from ships or hospitals or whatever, why then we would issue them out in smaller amounts. It's kind of like a wholesale house, and then a pharmacy would call the wholesale house, and then we'd ship them to the pharmacy. It's that sort of thing. That we worked hard, and I never saw a thermometer in Guadalcanal. They didn't want you to see a thermometer, and I could feel the heat, the sun rays just coming down and hit you. But I don't know. We worked hard, and we had about 20 guys, I guess. We had a warrant officer that we liked. We had an ensign that he had come up from the ranks, and he didn't. He was. I don't know. He wore an ensign insignia on his, but he let it tarnish so it looked like silver, and which is in the military, silver is higher than gold, and I don't know why. I never understood that. But you see an officer, you see like a lieutenant commander is like a gold oak leaf. Well, you get one step higher, it's a silver oak. And I think all the general stars are silver. I'm not sure. And the admirals, although there's a lot of gold on an admiral's sleeve. So.
What about the surgical units?
The what?
What was it like working in the surgical unit?
Well, we took care of people right after they came out of the operating room, and they required, they were, and in those days, like an appendectomy or something would take several days in the hospital, and you had to do all their well, you'd serve them meals and everything, and most of them could eat, but I don't know, some of them have to sit on a bedpan or whatever. You didn't get them up and move them like you don't go in one afternoon and out that following evening. It was long stints in the hospital. So, and the surgical ward, as soon as they were up and able to take care of themselves, then they moved to a different ward till they were able to go back to their duty station.
So I understand you served in the Pacific Theater, but did anybody that you know have any experience with General Eisenhower under his leadership, or any thoughts about him?
Well, I admired General Eisenhower for what he did. I mean, talk about a job. That was a terrible job he had, but he did a fine job of it. And my brother was, well, I don't know, some way or another, he was just a private, which is, when he was in prison camp, that was a good thing, because he got to go out from his prison camp and work in the daytime, and he didn't smoke, neither did I. So he took Red Cross cigarettes out, and he would trade them for food, for potatoes. And he had a slit in his uniform, in his coat he wore, and he'd smuggle them back into prison camp. And then he'd share them with the rest of his people in his barracks. So but the Nazis, he was in a German prison camp, and the Nazis, if you were a sergeant or above, you didn't do manual work. That was beneath you. And so the privates were doing that, but in a way it was a godsend that he was able, that way the Allies had come over and bombed the railroad stations and the tracks at night, and they'd go out and fix them in the daytime. Only somehow or another, their tools would disappear, and they'd hide them when the guards weren't looking, or they'd break them when the guards weren't looking. Everything to slow the progress down. So even though they were prisoners, they were still fighting in a way. So, and like Bruce went on that, when he was killed, he knew he was going to get killed, or he felt it anyway. And he was a radio man with the Marines, and that's who they tried to kill the first off, so the rest of the units couldn't communicate with one another. And so I think that's why he felt that he wasn't going to make it. And that's off on your story. I get sorry about that.
Did you take care of amputees for a while?
Well, yeah, that was part of the surgical ward too, yeah. I know we had one guy, I think he had cancer at the time, and they took off his left arm and all of his shoulder way back up there. He finally died on the ward. He just couldn't make it. And but we took care of him. I took care of him most of the time I was on the ward, or he was one of the ones I took care of. So you had to do a lot for him because he just had one arm. I remember one guy that was giving us trouble, and I mean, he was a pain in the neck, and he had a hemorrhoid operation. So he said, we had to repack his hemorrhoid thing with gauze and stuff, and kind of a messy job. And he wanted to look at that. So I had a mirror there that was two-way mirror. On one side it was magnified, and the other side it wasn't. I put the magnifying side up there to show him the hole that they'd cut out. And he about fainted, so he wasn't near as bad after that. So, But anyway, that's one of the little things, you know, you do. And when I was on Guadalcanal, our main source of recreation was we'd swim. We'd go to the ocean and swim. And I was young then. I'd swim as far as I could out to the Talagi. That was the next island over. And till I couldn't swim anymore. And then I'd just lay back and rest and then swim back to Guadalcanal again. I didn't even think about sharks, but there's sharks. But they had one of our guys, we had to supply the guy to run the honey wagon, and that was a garbage scow. And he'd go out and get out there so far, and then he'd dump his garbage. And he always dumped his garbage way off from where we swam, so the sharks would go to the garbage and eat that instead of the people. So that made the beaches safe. And then one time we went for a little trip. We went to where the Japanese, they had a terrible naval battle in there and off the coast. And the Japanese had a 2-man submarine that they beached, and we climbed aboard that and went through it and everything. I never wanted to be a submariner, I tell you. They're close quarters. But anyway, then one time we drove up the river, up into the mountains on Guadalcanal, and up there there were some natives up there that I guess lived there permanently, and they had their village, and went and looked in one of the the natives' huts, and they had a phonograph record in there, and I forget what phonograph. You Are My Sunshine. I think that's what the phonograph was. And they were playing that when we got there. So I think as we drove up there, there were some orchids growing wild. We picked orchids, and we had orchids in our lapels, or buttons, shirt buttons. We put orchids in there, and just growing wild. And so you know it's a pretty warm country when the orchids can grow. So.
Is that where you got all the ringworm?
Oh yeah. At one time I had 100 ringworms on me, and so I went to the hospital, and they weren't curing them fast enough, so we made our own portions from some of the medicine we had. And it stung a little, but I think the main thing was swimming in the ocean finally cured it. So.
Wow.
One time there was an ammunition ship blew up in the harbor, and it knocked us all out of bed. We were so, and they think they got somebody got a newspaper back from home, and that was after the war was over, that they published this thing about the ammunition ship blowing up. And there was one fellow that came out of that alive. I think he was sitting on a fantail and got blown off and lit in the water, and he lived. But we didn't know whether the Japs was starting to come back. The Japanese were starting to come back and retake the island or what. And we didn't have any guns or anything, but we finally learned that no, it was an ammunition ship that blew up. So that's my closest encounter. The Washington Machine Charlie and the ammunition ship was my closest to coming to combat.
Is there anything that you still want to share that maybe we forgot to ask, or?
Oh, I can't think that there is, other than wars are horrible, and I like the Navy, but I just didn't think it was a place to raise kids, and a lot of people do it, and they do a fine job. mean to downgrade anybody, and I'm glad they do it. I'm glad we still have a strong military, but hope to God we never have to use it. So, but we have been. But war is terrible.
If I could ask one other thing.
Sure.
It sounds like you learned a lot from your service, just sort of as a person. Is there anything that you would pass on from that sort of to the younger generation that we're sort of trying to educate through this program? You know.
Well, I think it'd be nice if everybody could serve the country in some way, and they won't let gays serve, or, well, I don't know what the status is now. It goes back and forth. I think they can now, but I imagine it'd be hard to get in. I don't know, and I just think it's a good thing to give something to your country, and I've never regretted what I've been in the service. I'm proud of it, but on the other hand, I don't think I'd want to do it again either, because I might not be so lucky this time, next time around. So I am fortunate. I am very fortunate. I'm still active. I got to get this in. I play pickleball 4 or 5 days a week. So.
Do you? That's great.
And so I'm active.
How old are you now?
94.
94.
Yeah.
You look great.
Well, thank you.
You look good.
I don't have much hair left, so there. I finally got my hat. You still photographing me?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
You'll probably knock this stuff out. So.
Oh, yeah. This is behind the scenes stuff.
Well, some of it you'll knock out, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to hear one of this ensign that, well, he finally made Lieutenant JG, or maybe Lieutenant, I don't know, before. He was regular Navy. And that's
Korea?
That
Is this in Korea?
no, this was still in World War II. And every day he'd come in there and he'd say, "Okay, guys, let's get to work. Get your finger out of your ass and your mind out of neutral and go to work." That's every day he'd say that when he'd come in. So, sorry about that, girls. Now, did you get that?
Maybe.
Maybe.